Admiral Vexistar floated in his command chamber, six eyes studying the holographic display that showed a small blue planet spinning peacefully around its yellow star. His tentacles moved across the control surface as he reviewed the data his scouts had gathered over the past several months. This was supposed to be routine, another primitive species to add to the Corvanian Empire's growing collection of conquered worlds. The creatures called themselves humans, and everything about them seemed disappointingly ordinary. They had barely managed to spread beyond their home planet, with only a few scattered colonies and mining stations in their local star system. Their technology was crude compared to Corvanian standards, still relying on chemical rockets and primitive energy. Weapons. Most telling of all, they were divided into hundreds of separate nations, constantly bickering among themselves instead of presenting a united front. Mordak, his chief strategist, slithered into the chamber carrying additional reports. The analysis is complete, Admiral. These humans present no significant threat to our forces. Their largest warships are smaller than our scout vessels, and their military tactics appear chaotic and inefficient. Vextar examined the tactical breakdown with growing confidence. The humans seemed to favor small unit operations over the synchronized fleet movements that had dominated galactic warfare for centuries. They actually encouraged individual decision-making among their commanders, a practice that had led to the downfall of countless species who couldn't match the Corvanian collective consciousness approach to battle. Look at this, Mordak continued, highlighting sections of the report. They waste enormous resources on what they call rescue operations, actually risking additional ships and personnel to save soldiers who are already lost. No rational military force would engage in such inefficient behavior. The Admiral nodded, remembering dozens of previous conquests where species had surrendered the moment they realized the hopelessness of their situation. The smart ones negotiated terms for peaceful absorption into the Empire. The stubborn ones fought briefly before accepting inevitable defeat. Either way, most campaigns lasted weeks rather than months. What caught his attention were the human historical records his intelligence teams had managed to access. These creatures had been fighting wars among themselves for thousands of years, but their conflicts seemed strangely personal and emotional, rather than the calculated resource competitions that characterized advanced civilizations. They fought over abstract concepts like freedom and honor, often continuing battles long after any practical benefit had disappeared. Their psychology is primitive, the strategist explained. They form emotional attachments to geographical locations and will defend areas with no strategic value simply because they call it home. This emotional decision-making will work to our advantage once we demonstrate our superior capabilities. Vextar studied the defensive installations surrounding the human homeworld. Earth's orbital platforms and patrol fleets looked impressive to species at their technological level, but the Corvanian fleet approaching their system numbered over 2,000 ships. Each one carried weapons that could crack a planet's crust, and shields that could withstand anything in the human arsenal. The Conquest fleet had been assembled from veteran units that had participated in dozens of successful campaigns. These crews knew exactly how to apply overwhelming force to break enemy resistance quickly and efficiently. Standard doctrine called for a massive display of power followed by demands for surrender, then surgical strikes against military targets if the species proved unreasonably stubborn. Captain Lee Minho commanded the Earth Defense Coalition's newest battleship, the EDS Triumph, patrolling near Jupiter when long-range sensors detected the approaching alien fleet. He'd been expecting this moment ever since first contact protocols had been established years earlier, but seeing those sensor readings still sent chills through his crew. "Sir, we're counting at least 2,000 vessels," reported his sensor operator Park Jiwoo. "They're maintaining formation just outside our system's edge, but their energy signatures are unlike anything in our databases." Lee studied the tactical display, knowing that every ship in the human fleet combined wouldn't equal the firepower approaching their system. The aliens had clearly advanced far beyond human technology, but something about their precise formations and coordinated movements suggested they expected easy victory. Communications Officer Kim Soo-young looked up from her station. "Admiral, we're receiving a transmission. It's in perfect English somehow." The message appeared on their main screen, delivered in emotionless text. Surrender your species to the Corvanian Empire. Compliance will result in peaceful integration. Resistance will result in extinction. You have one planetary rotation to respond. The bridge fell silent as every crew member absorbed the implications. This wasn't a diplomatic contact or trade negotiation. This was a conquest demand from a civilization that clearly possessed the power to enforce it. Lee could see the fear in his people's faces, but also something else that might surprise their would-be conquerors. He stood slowly, looking around at officers who had volunteered to serve knowing this day might come. Prepare a response to transmit, on all frequencies. Make sure every ship in their fleet receives it clearly. Kim Soo-young's fingers moved across her controls. Ready to transmit, Admiral. Lee Min-ho straightened his shoulders and spoke words that would echo across the galaxy. We respectfully decline your offer. Earth and her colonies will remain free. The first shots of what would become known as the Jupiter War came at 0347 Earth Standard Time, when Commander Yang Hyunwoo's patrol squadron detected Corvanian scouts moving toward Europa Station. His 6 frigates were conducting routine patrols near the gas giant's moons when sensors lit up with contacts that shouldn't exist. Contact bearing 27 Mark IV, called out his tactical officer. Make that multiple contacts. I'm reading. 30 vessels. Unknown configuration. Yang studied the approaching formation through his ship's viewports. The alien vessels moved with mechanical precision, maintaining perfect spacing and identical approach vectors. Everything about their movement suggested advanced coordination and overwhelming technological superiority. His small patrol force was completely outmatched. Standard military doctrine would have called for immediate withdrawal to preserve his ships and report enemy positions. Yang knew he should order his squadron back to Earth's defensive perimeter, where they might contribute to a larger battle. Instead, he found himself thinking about the 3,000 civilians working on Europa Station, completely unaware that death was approaching at sublight speed. All ships, this is Phoenix Leader, he transmitted to his squadron. We're not retreating. Those people on Europa need time to evacuate, and we're going to buy it for them. The engagement that followed defied every principle of rational military tactics that had governed galactic warfare for millennia. Yang's frigates charged directly into the alien formation, weapons blazing despite the futility of their position. The Corvanian ships responded with measured precision, their energy weapons carving through human shields like paper. But something unexpected happened in those first few minutes of combat. The human ships didn't break formation when their shields failed. They didn't attempt to surrender when their weapons were clearly ineffective. Instead, they kept fighting with increasing desperation and creativity that caught the Corvanian commanders completely off guard. When the frigate Seoul took critical damage to its main reactor, Captain Park Ji-hoon didn't order his crew to abandon ship. Instead, he rerouted all remaining power to engines and aimed his dying vessel directly at the largest Corvanian cruiser. The collision and subsequent explosion took out both ships and damaged 2 others in the alien formation. Admiral Vextar watched the tactical feed from his flagship with growing confusion. His analysts had predicted the human patrol would withdraw after the first exchange of fire, possibly attempting hit-and-run tactics before falling back to their main defensive positions. Instead, these primitive creatures were throwing away their lives in gestures that served no strategic purpose. They're wasting resources, observed Mordak, but his voice carried a note of uncertainty. This behavior makes no tactical sense. The battle continued for nearly 4 hours, far longer than any engagement should have lasted with such overwhelming odds. The human ships fought until their weapons failed, then used their ships as weapons. When their hulls were breached and their crews were dying, they continued transmitting targeting data to their surviving companions. Yang Hyunwoo's flagship was the last human vessel still fighting when his communications officer reported that Europa Station had completed its evacuation. Civilian transports were now safely away from the combat zone, carrying 3,000 people who would have died without the sacrifice of his squadron. Mission accomplished, Yang transmitted to the approaching Corvanian fleet. His ship was crippled, life support failing, and his crew reduced to a handful of survivors. Was it worth it? The explosion that consumed his ship lit up space around Jupiter's moons like a second sun, visible to observation posts throughout the outer system. Yang Hyunwoo and his crew had bought time for civilians to escape, but they had done something else that would prove far more significant in the days to come. They had shown the galaxy that humans didn't fight to win battles in the traditional sense. They fought to accomplish objectives regardless of personal cost. News of the engagement spread through human communication networks faster than the Corvanian fleet could advance toward Earth. Captain Park Soyeon received word of Yang's sacrifice. While commanding the defensive platforms around Luna Station, Earth's moon base that housed over 50,000 personnel. Her defensive force consisted of 12 orbital weapons platforms and 8 patrol boats, facing an approaching Corvanian battle group of over 100 ships. The math was simple and brutal. She couldn't win this fight using conventional tactics. "All stations, this is Luna Command," she transmitted to her small fleet. "We're going to make them pay for every meter of space between here and Earth. When they finally take this position, I want them to remember the price they paid for it." The battle for Luna Station lasted 6 days and became a masterclass in defensive warfare that military academies would study for generations. Park Soyeon turned every piece of debris into a weapon, every damaged platform into a fort, and every tactical retreat into a trap for pursuing enemies. The Corvanians eventually claimed the wreckage of Luna Station, but the cost had been staggering. 40 ships destroyed or damaged, thousands of casualties, and a growing realization that their easy conquest was turning into something entirely different. As Corvanian forces moved toward Earth itself, Admiral Vextar found himself facing a question that had never come up in previous campaigns. How do you defeat an enemy that considers defeat just another form of warfare? 3 months after the first Corvanian ships entered human space, Admiral Vextar stared at reports that made no sense according to everything he understood about warfare. His forces had captured most major human installations, destroyed their orbital defenses, and scattered their fleet. By every measure used to evaluate military campaigns, the conquest should have been complete. Instead, every single day brought new casualty reports from worlds his forces supposedly controlled. Colonel Cho Woo-jin had been a mining engineer on Mars before the invasion began. When Corvanian forces landed at the main colony sites, standard protocol called for civilian evacuation to designated safe zones. Cho had different ideas. He gathered together 43 miners, mechanics, and equipment operators who refused to abandon their homes. "We know these tunnels better than anyone," he told his small group as they gathered in an abandoned mining complex deep beneath the Martian surface. "The aliens might control the surface, but down here, we make the rules." What followed was a masterclass in guerrilla warfare that the Corvanian military had never encountered. Cho's people used industrial mining equipment as weapons, turning plasma cutters into infantry support weapons and explosive charges into improvised bombs. They struck at supply convoys, communication relays, and isolated patrol units before, disappearing back into the maze of tunnels that honeycombed Mars. Every time the Corvanians thought they had eliminated one resistance cell, 3 more would emerge from survivors and newly recruited civilians. The aliens found themselves fighting an enemy that grew stronger through defeat, rather than weaker. Lieutenant Nam Ji-young commanded what remained of the 47th Infantry Regiment after the fall of Earth's Australian continent. Her unit had been officially listed as destroyed 4 separate times in military reports, yet they continued operating from the ruins of Sydney's underground transit system. "Command, this is Ghost 7, she transmitted during one of her rare communications with surviving military leadership. "We're down to 15 soldiers and operating from storm drains and subway tunnels, requesting ammunition and medical supplies. Also, please stop listing us as dead in your reports. It's bad for morale." Her small team had perfected the art of living off captured enemy supplies while conducting raids that far exceeded their apparent capabilities. They used the aliens' own weapons against them, having figured out how to operate Corvanian equipment through trial and error. When conventional tactics failed, they got creative. Nam's people discovered that Corvanian soldiers relied heavily on their advanced sensor systems and became confused when those systems were compromised. A few strategically placed electromagnetic pulse devices could blind an entire patrol, turning high-tech warriors into confused targets, stumbling through unfamiliar urban terrain. The psychological impact on Corvanian forces began showing in their operational reports. Soldiers who had conquered dozens of worlds found themselves jumping at shadows, never sure when the next attack might come from seemingly empty buildings or abandoned vehicles that suddenly exploded. Major Song Minjae ran what had once been Earth's largest military research facility, now operating from hidden bunkers scattered across 3 continents. His engineering teams had become masters of reverse engineering, taking apart captured Corvanian technology and figuring out how to combine alien power systems with human manufacturing capabilities. "We don't need to build perfect copies," HFY explained to his team as they worked on their latest hybrid weapon design. "We need to build something that works, and we need to build it fast using whatever materials we can find." The weapons that emerged from Song's workshops looked nothing like standard military equipment. They combined Corvanian energy cells with human targeting systems, alien armor plating with human mobility gear, and captured ship components with terrestrial manufacturing techniques. The result was equipment that often outperformed both human and alien standard issue. More importantly, human manufacturing centers had shifted to complete wartime production. Civilian factories that once made consumer electronics now churned out crude but effective weapons. Automotive plants produced armored vehicles. Food processing facilities were converted to ammunition production. Every aspect of human civilization had been redirected toward the war effort. Commander Shin Dae-young led deep space raids using modified civilian vessels that the Corvanians never saw coming. Cargo haulers packed with explosives, passenger shuttles converted to carry troops, even luxury yachts equipped with salvaged weapon systems. Her philosophy was simple. If it could fly and carry a weapon, it could contribute to the war effort. "The aliens think in terms of military versus civilian targets," she explained to her pilots during a briefing aboard a converted cruise ship. "They don't expect attacks from vehicles that aren't supposed to be weapons. We're going to use that against them." Her raids disrupted Corvanian supply lines and communications networks throughout the outer system. More importantly, they demonstrated that humanity would use absolutely anything and everything in their war effort. There were no non-combatants, no safe zones, and no equipment that couldn't be turned into a weapon. Admiral Vexitar finally understood what his forces were facing when he received a report from a Corvanian ground commander on one of Jupiter's moons. The message was brief and disturbing. "Request immediate reinforcement. Enemy casualties are recruiting faster than we can eliminate them. Situation becoming untenable." The humans weren't just fighting a war. They had become the war itself. 8 months into what was supposed to be a quick conquest, Admiral Vexitar found himself staring at casualty reports that defied every principle of military science he had learned over 3 centuries of warfare. His forces occupied most major human installations, yet required constant reinforcement just to maintain basic operations. Every supply convoy needed escorts. Every communication relay required guards. Every supposedly secure position faced daily attacks from enemies who should have been eliminated months ago. The breaking point came when Commander Shin Dae-young received approval for Operation Phoenix, the most audacious plan in human military history. Intelligence reports indicated that the Corvanian Regional Command Ship, the massive vessel directing the entire invasion, would be conducting a fleet review near Saturn's rings. The ship would be surrounded by hundreds of escorts, protected by energy shields that could deflect anything in the human arsenal. Shin gathered her volunteer crews in the cargo bay of a converted freighter that served as her mobile headquarters. The assembled pilots looked nothing like a traditional military unit. They were merchant captains, civilian transport operators, mining vessel crews, and freight haulers who had answered the call when conventional forces proved insufficient. "This mission has no backup plan," she told them honestly. "We're going to modify civilian vessels to carry the largest explosive payloads we can manage, then fly them directly at the command ship. The mathematics are simple. We need to get close enough to overwhelm their defenses through sheer numbers and destructive power. Captain Yoon Ji-hoon raised his hand from the back of the group. "Commander, what are our survival odds?" Shin looked around at faces that showed fear but no hesitation. "Honestly, near zero. This is a one-way mission. Anyone who wants to walk away can do so right now with no judgment from anyone." Nobody moved. Over the next 2 weeks, human engineering teams worked around the clock to prepare the strike force. Cargo haulers were packed with nuclear warheads and conventional explosives. Passenger liners had their luxury compartments filled with fuel-air bombs. Even small personal craft were loaded with whatever destructive materials could fit in their cargo holds. The modifications were crude but effective. Ships that had never been designed for combat were turned into flying bombs guided by volunteer crews who understood they were embarking on suicide missions. Each vessel carried enough firepower to level a city, and the strike force numbered 43 ships total. Shin led the formation personally, flying a converted luxury yacht that had once carried wealthy tourists on pleasure cruises around the two outer planets. Now its champagne storage compartments held antimatter charges scavenged from destroyed human warships. The approach to the Corvanian fleet required threading through Saturn's rings while avoiding detection by advanced sensor networks. The human ships flew in complete radio silence, using predetermined routes and timing to coordinate their attack without communication that might alert their targets. "This is Phoenix Leader," Shin transmitted when they reached the final approach. "Vector, all ships execute on my mark. It's been an honor serving with you." The Corvanian sensors detected the incoming attack formation when they were less than 10 minutes from the command ship. Admiral Vextar watched in horror as his tactical display filled with small contacts moving at maximum velocity directly toward his flagship. The approaching vessels showed no attempt at evasive maneuvering or self-preservation. "Deploy all defensive units," he ordered, but his escort commanders were already moving to intercept. Energy weapons began carving through the human formation, destroying ship after ship in brilliant explosions that lit up Saturn's rings like fireworks. But the humans kept coming. Ship after ship died in the defensive fire, yet the survivors maintained course and speed toward their target. When the cargo hauler Northern Star took critical damage, its captain simply rerouted all power to engines and continued his attack run, even as his ship's hull peeled away around him. The luxury liner Golden Dreams exploded under concentrated fire when it was still 30 kilometers from the command ship, but the blast wave disrupted Corvanian defensive formations long enough for 3 smaller vessels to slip through their protective screen. Shin's yacht was one of the last ships still flying when she reached visual range of the massive Corvanian flagship. Her vessel was battered and venting atmosphere. Half her crew was dead and her engines were running on emergency power, but she could see her target growing larger through the viewport. "Phoenix Leader to any human vessels receiving," she transmitted on all frequencies. "Tell them we made it count." The explosion that consumed the Corvanian command ship and 12 escort vessels could be seen from 3 star systems away. The blast created a temporary new ring around Saturn that would be visible to astronomers for decades. Captain Yoon Ji-hoon survived the mission, his heavily damaged transport limping back to human space with news of their success. His report to Earth Command was simple. Command ship destroyed. 43 volunteers confirmed dead. Mission accomplished. For the first time since the invasion began, Admiral Vextar faced a situation that his military training had never prepared him to handle. He had lost his regional command structure, his most experienced officers, and 8,000 irreplaceable personnel in a single engagement. More importantly, he now understood that humans didn't fight to win battles. They fought to make their enemies stop fighting. The withdrawal order arrived at Admiral Vextar's remaining fleet 8 months and 17 days after the first Corvanian ships had entered human space. The message came directly from the Empire's High Council, transmitted across the galaxy with unprecedented urgency. For the first time in over 1,000 years of conquest, the Corvanian Empire was ordering a complete military retreat. Vextar read the order 3 times before accepting its reality. His forces had captured most major human installations, controlled the shipping lanes, and maintained orbital superiority over Earth itself. By every traditional measure of military success, the campaign should have been declared a victory months ago. Instead, his casualty reports told a different story. The Corvanian Empire had lost more ships, personnel, and resources in 8 months of fighting humans than they had in the previous century of conquering other species. Worse, the losses were accelerating rather than decreasing as the campaign continued. General Hong Min-seok stood on the bridge of humanity's newest flagship, a vessel constructed from salvaged Corvanian technology and human engineering expertise. The ship represented everything the war had taught his species about survival and adaptation. Where Corvanian vessels prioritized efficiency and standardization, human ships now emphasized redundancy and improvisation. Admiral Vexitar is requesting direct communication, reported Captain Oh Sungmin from the communications station. He's asking for terms of withdrawal. Hong studied the tactical display showing the positions of both fleets. The Corvanian forces still outnumbered humanity's remaining ships, but numbers had proven meaningless in this conflict. The aliens had learned that destroying human vessels only meant facing the upgraded replacements that emerged from hidden shipyards. Put him through, Hong ordered. Admiral Vexitar appeared on the main screen, his alien features showing what might have been exhaustion or perhaps something approaching respect. 8 months of fighting humans had aged the Corvanian commander in ways that centuries of previous warfare had not. General Hong, I come to you with an offer of cessation of hostilities. Vexitar began, his translator rendering the alien words into careful English. This conflict serves no strategic purpose for either of our civilizations. Hong nodded slowly, thinking of the millions of humans who had died defending their worlds. Admiral, we never wanted this war. But since you brought it to our doorstep, we intended to see it through to the end. Your species fights unlike anything we have encountered in a millennium of conquest, the alien commander continued. We have studied your tactics, your psychology, your technological adaptations. We cannot comprehend the logic that drives your resistance. What Vexitar couldn't understand was that logic had very little to do with human behavior during the war. The driving force had been something far more primitive and powerful than rational decision-making. Humans fought because they were humans, and humans didn't surrender their homes without a fight that would be remembered across the galaxy. Lieutenant Colonel Park Yoon-ji watched the withdrawal from her position, commanding the rebuilt defenses of Mars. Her forces now included a mix of human survivors and former Corvanian equipment that had been captured, modified, and put back into service against its original owners. Colonel, we're receiving reports that alien forces are pulling back from all occupied territories, her aide reported. It looks like they're actually leaving. Park nodded, but kept her weapon systems active. She had learned not to trust easy victories during 8 months of warfare that had redefined what victory meant. Maintain battle stations until they're completely out of our space, and keep working on those new defensive platforms. This might be over, but it won't be the last time someone tries to conquer us. News of the Corvanian withdrawal spread through galactic communication networks faster than the alien ships could retreat from human territory. Species that had been conquered by the Empire centuries ago watched in amazement as reports confirmed the impossible. The mighty Corvanian fleet was running away from a species that had barely achieved interstellar travel. The psychological impact rippled across the galaxy. If humans could force the Corvanians to retreat, what did that mean for other species that had accepted conquest as inevitable? What did it mean for the Empire's claims of invincibility? Captain Kim Soo-young filed her final battle report from the bridge of a patrol ship, constructed entirely from materials salvaged during the war. The vessel represented everything humans had learned about combining alien technology with their own engineering philosophy. All Corvanian forces have departed human space, she reported to Earth Command. We're maintaining patrol schedules and continuing construction of new defensive installations. The Earth Defense Coalition stands ready for any future threats. But the real victory wasn't measured in ships destroyed or territory defended. The war had fundamentally changed humanity's place in the galaxy. They were no longer an unknown species on the edge of civilized space. They had become the civilization that had accomplished what no other had managed in 1,000 years. Admiral Vexitar's final report to the High Council was brutally honest. The humans cannot be conquered through conventional means. They possess a psychological resistance to defeat that grows stronger under pressure. Any future contact with this species should be conducted through diplomatic rather than military channels. As the last Corvanian ships disappeared from human sensors, General Hong looked out at the stars and wondered what other civilizations might be watching and learning from what had happened in this small corner of the galaxy. The war was over, but humanity's reputation had just begun.